Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. All right, we are in draft week, just a few days away from the 2025 NFL draft. And here, with all of the answers about what the New York Giants are going to do, is the woman who knows everything. Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants and New York Giants on SI, who still apparently knows everything except how to get that sign fixed behind her. How you doing, Patty?
You just aren't going to let it go about that sign, are you?
Oh no, I'm not. Not until you fix it.
I just want people to know that I was the original Giants country, the original Giants country on SI until we changed our name. So,
All right, all right. There you go. So Patty, thank you for hopping on and helping me dissect all of the comings and goings and rumors and God knows what everybody else is saying about the Giants and the NFL draft. And oh, by the way, happy birthday! As we record on Sunday night, happy birthday!
oh, thank you.
You're
I thought you
29,
wanted to
right?
sing, but I
No,
guess
I'm
you're
not going to sing you,
listening.
but you're 29, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, that works. That's always good. We'll just leave it there.
Okay, deal.
All right, but seriously, happy birthday.
Thank you.
All right. So, Patty, let's get into the New York Giants a little bit. And I think at this point, it seems like a relative certainty that it's going to be Abdul Carter at number 3. Not Shadur Sanders, not, whoever else you might think of, but it seems like a relative certainty that it's Abdul Carter at 3. And if the draft falls Cam Ward, Travis Hunter in the first 2 picks, that the right call for you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's interesting. I started to write a piece for New York Giants on SI, which I'm sure by the time this airs, that piece will be out. But normally I'd be like, yeah, do you really want the leftovers, from the team in front of you? In this case, we know Cam Ward is probably going to go to the Titans, and the Browns are going to have their pick of, Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter, and the Giants will get whoever's quote unquote left over. I don't look at it that way. Those are two very good players. They are players that can make an impact, an instant impact on the Giants. I would not be unhappy if it is Abdul Carter because I do believe if defensive coordinator Shane Bowen is creative enough, and I'm sure that he is. I mean, that's what he gets paid for after all. I think there is a way that they can deploy him in multiple ways actually to get him on this field at the same time as Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns and Dexter Lawrence. And so if he is on the board, as we suspect he will be, I would airmail that card up to the commissioner.
Absolutely. Patty, let's turn to, without I don't want to give or don't want to shortchange Abdul Carter at 3, but the real topic, the real major, point of discussion with the Giants comes down to quarterback. Now, Joe said at his pre-draft press conference that he doesn't feel like it's mandatory to get a quarterback. He said he doesn't want to be backed into a corner, to get a quarterback. Yet, I feel like there's still pressure on him to get a quarterback to at least take a swing here, to at least come out of this draft, whether it's a quarterback he drafts by trading up, whether it's somebody he drafts in the second round, whether it's a third or fourth round pick. I feel like there's some pressure on him to put a rookie quarterback onto this roster. How do you feel about that? How do you see that?
Oh, I agree. Joe also said, I think it was at the combine, that he's going to take swings at the quarterback spot. It was either the combine or the owners meeting. I
Yeah,
forget
it was
which
the
one it was.
combine. He said that. Yes.
Yeah. So he's now all of a sudden he's saying, "Well, I don't feel pressure to do it." After saying that, I'm always going to take a swing. Why the reversal all of a sudden? He's taking a swing. I would be shocked if he doesn't. And here's the other reason why I would be shocked if he doesn't take a swing. You've got two veterans on your roster in Russell Wilson, who was signed for 1 year, and Jameis Winston, who was signed for 2 years. They're two very good, they're different veterans, but they're two very good veterans who can teach a rookie quite a lot. So why would you punt on drafting a quarterback and not take advantage of those two guys who could be an invaluable resource? I think they're going to take a swing, whether it's trading up, which I don't know if they're going to necessarily do, or maybe they stay put and do it with a second round pick. They're going to take a swing on a quarterback. And if it doesn't work out, you know what? You take another swing next year and you keep taking a swing until you get it right.
And that's the thing I was going to mention. In my own mock draft on Sunday, um, I did the trade up and take a swing, and I took Jackson Dart. And it's funny because I was on Daniel Jeremiah's conference call on Friday, his pre-draft call, and I actually was able to ask Jeremiah, what he would do, and he said he would do the trade up. He would take the swing. He would love that move for the Giants. And look, I took Jackson Dart. If you love Jackson Dart, you move up, try to move up, take that swing. If you love Jalen Milroe, you do this, you try to take that swing. But you lose the 5th-year option if you take somebody at 34, or if you take them at 65, if you take them anywhere beyond the first round. But the one thing that also does is what you just mentioned. It makes it a whole lot easier to take another swing next year. If you work with this rookie quarterback for a year and you're not so sure that he's the answer. So, I mean, do you see it that way as well?
It's interesting. I go back and forth on this. I see the argument for trading up, and I'm going to kind of go big picture here. The Giants, you look at what Joe Shane did in free agency. There really aren't very many, if any, glaring, oh my gosh, we've got to fill this or else needs on this team. They added to the offensive line, to the offensive tackle. They added to the defensive secondary. They added some veteran defensive linemen. They added special teams guys. They added two quarterbacks. They're in a position now. And then if you throw in the cap situation, which right now I think they're the lowest. I think they have the least amount of cap space. That's going to change, obviously, but it kind of makes sense in a way. If you're Joe Shane, you say, okay, look, it's not like I gotta have a guy here. It almost makes sense to say, okay, you know what? I'll give up my second round pick and maybe one of my thirds to move back into the bottom of the first round to get the quarterback I want. Because look, that kid's going to sit for this year. We know that, Russell Wilson's going to, be the starter. Jameis Winston's the backup. And unless there's like a rash of injuries, that kid's going to sit. So that means if you don't get him on in the first round where you can get that 5th-year option, you only have really 3 years to evaluate him before you have to extend him or make a decision on him. So I can make an argument for trading up. Now the question is, will the Cleveland Browns get in the way? Because they too need a quarterback. Their draft assets are almost identical to what the Giants have. They might be able to give a little bit more to trade up to get a quarterback. And, if the Giants get into a bidding war with them to move up to, say, 20, where Denver is sitting, that's when it gets interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm reminded also when we talk about trading up for quarterbacks. Brandon Beane said this about trading up a few years ago to get Josh Allen. And this was also the case way back in 2004 when the Giants traded up for Eli. It looks like a lot at the time. But does anybody in Buffalo care at this point what the Bills gave up to get Josh Allen? I'm not, does anybody even remember what they gave up to get Josh Allen? I don't think they care. And if it hadn't worked, Brandon Beane would have gotten fired and somebody else would have had to pick up the pieces. And any Giants fan out there care that because of the trade the Giants made for Eli Manning, they only had 4 picks in 2005? Of course, it helps that 3 of those picks turned into Corey Webster, Justin Tuck, and Brandon Jacobs. But does anybody really care, what they gave up? It worked.
Right. And they took a similar approach, if I remember correctly, in 2004, where they added veterans. They basically, they had guys. So it wasn't like, oh my gosh, we've got to get A, B, C, and D. It was almost the same scenario. So, they say history repeats itself. You can kind of make a case here that history might be repeating itself. It can make sense, like I said, because you get the quarterback on the 5th-year option, which is what you really want to do ideally. But at the same time, if you're Joe Shane and you feel, okay, look, we probably want to address the defensive line, we want to address the offensive line, we've got to do that. Then you say, well, do I really want to give up those premium picks? Because, they haven't really spent a whole lot on premium picks on offense and defensive line. And those premium picks that they have spent on the O-line, how many of those guys have really been, turned out to be studs? Probably not.
Right. Right. So let me ask you this. You mentioned the various things that they did in free agency. There is still, and maybe this is because the Giants have been bad for the last 2 years. They're 9-25 over the last 2 seasons. You'll read a lot in the national media about how awful the Giants roster is and how bad they're going to be and how much help they need. And they need so much help to be a good football team. I tend to disagree that the roster is terrible. I don't think it is terrible. I think maybe they need more game changers, but I don't think it is terrible. I think it's a better roster than people might want to think. Um, how do you see the Giants roster entering the draft?
I would agree with you. I think it is a little bit better than what people are giving it credit for. Now, is it perfect? No. Is it a championship roster? No. But is it, a bottom dweller? I know what the record said last year, but how much of that was because of the quarterback play? How much of that was because the offensive line had injuries galore, but no depth ready to step up, which is something I've been screaming about now for years? How much of that was the defensive line not having depth to step up when Dexter Lawrence went down? So, look, I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses, but you've got to look at the whole picture here. And I don't think, on the surface that the healthy roster last year was necessarily a 3-win team. Now, that said, there were questions about quarterback and everything kind of crumbled around, the Giants on that. But I felt like they should have won at least double the amount of games that they did win. Um, they went backwards, and it was a combination of things. But look, they didn't really change up the offense all that much this year, other than quarterback. They're returning just about every starter from last year. So what does that tell you about how they view the roster? And on defense, okay, we knew that they were going to have to, redo the secondary. We knew that was going to happen. We know that they got to add on the defensive line because they still need a good 3 tech next to Dexter Lawrence. But really, not wholesale changes. There haven't been wholesale
Mhm.
changes to suggest that, oh my gosh, this roster was completely, terrible and we had to shake everything up.
Right. Um, we've kind of talked about it, but I haven't directly ask this question for you. Get away from quarterback for a minute. Um, we talked about Abdul Carter at number 3, which obviously would add, the big time pass rusher, big time edge rusher, and sort of create that monster pass rush potentially. Um, Looking at the rest of the roster, looking at all 3 days of the draft, what is your must do for Joe Shane? What is your thing that he absolutely has to get done? Outside of putting some sort of a young quarterback on this roster.
The trenches, hands down, offensive line in particular. You've got veterans, and when they're healthy, they're very good. But as we saw last year, when injuries hit, who did they have to turn to? They had to drag in guys off the street. Andrew Thomas went down. What were they doing? They were plugging in guys who were natural right tackles that didn't really have experience on the left side and asking them to play on that side. They were plugging in Joshua Azudu, who was a guard, not a tackle at this level. They were plugging him in. And I've been screaming about this for years. It's like they have no young talent in the pipeline. And I think that is a huge, huge mistake. Next year, you're probably going to lose Jermaine Illuminor unless you extend him. You don't know if you're going to get Greg Van Roten back. I believe John Runyon, and I'd have to check, but I know his guaranteed money runs out. I think it's this year.
Yeah,
You're going
it
to
does because it's a 3-year deal.
Right. So you're going to potentially have 3 openings, and you don't know if Evan Neal's going to work out at guard. So he's technically in the last year of his contract. I don't see them picking up his option year. So you're going to have potentially a lot of openings on that offensive line. You better get young talent in this year. Start letting Carmen Brasillo and James Ferentz, let them start working with these guys so that come next year, you could say, okay, you know what? We're going to move on from this player. Or, oh, you want too much money, player X? We're going to move on from you because we got guys in the pipeline.
That is a good reminder, Patty, and this is something that I say all the time. The draft is not necessarily about the upcoming season. The draft is because you're only going to get 1 or 2 players that are really going to be big time contributors as rookies anyway, most of the time. The draft is about the future. It's about the next several years. And the draft has to be, you have to think ahead. You have to be a forward thinker and think about what you might need in a year, because a lot of these kids need a year or 2 to develop. So it isn't necessarily about, I need this guy now. It's my roster's going to need these things going forward over the next few years.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah,
so
you have to look ahead.
yeah, which I know everybody gets excited about the 2025 season, but the job of the organization is to think ahead, which for for the Giants it's just weird because they brought Joe and Dave's back, and they have to get through a good 2025 if there's going to be a 2026. And so that, I don't know about you, but I feel like it sort of complicates every decision that they make.
I don't think it's that complicated. I think it's common sense, if anything. I mean, is anybody out there going to say that this Giants roster is 1 or 2 players away from making a Super Bowl run? I don't think we can say that. So, look, the rebuild, for what it's worth, it was delayed, if you will, because of the success they had in 2022. And that success masks some of the problems that were maybe underlying on the surface, or underneath the surface, I should say, that Joe probably thought, oh, hey, it worked out, so maybe we'll just expedite this rebuild. And by doing that, they took a step backwards. I would like to think that Joe and Brian have learned their lesson, that you can't take a step backwards. You can't let, success, that came out of nowhere, basically. You can't let that just say, knock you off your planned course. You got to look at everything objectively and with your eyes wide open. You can't just say, "Oh, wow, we had success, so we're further along than we thought we'd be."
Yeah, which I think you're absolutely right. They did get knocked off course. They did some things after that 2022 season in the 2023 off season. They did some things they wouldn't ordinarily have done.
For
Patty, let
sure.
me ask yeah, let me ask you this. Um, we talked about your must do. Um, let's say that they go through the draft, they hold on to all their picks. They've got picks at 34 and 65 and 99 and 105. What is one thing maybe that people aren't thinking about a whole lot that you would really like to see the Giants do, other than the trenches? What is one area, or one type of player maybe that you would really like to see them add to this roster?
I'm gonna say receiver, and only because look, I believe if Travis Hunter fell to them, they would snap him up in a heartbeat. And I believe that they would use him on defense and on offense. And this isn't to, knock Darius Slayton or Wandale Robinson, but if you get another playmaker who can maybe take some of the onus off of Malik Neighbors, which is what I think Travis Hunter would have been able to do for this offense. Now maybe things open up a little bit more for the deep ball. Now maybe you give the opponent something to think about. Do we double up Malik or do we double up, player X? So, you know, we talk about you can never have too many pass rushers. Same thing, I think, with receivers. And, the other thing, thinking ahead, Wandale Robinson in the final year of his deal. I don't know if a renewal is on the horizon for him. I'd like to think it is, but I don't know that. But even so, he's a little bit of a different receiver than, say, a guy who can, an X receiver, a guy who can play on the outside, who's big, physical, and who can, while Malik's running on the left side of the field, the other guy can be running down the right side of the field. And now, good luck figuring out who you're going to double. So I would say receiver would probably be a big one. Obviously, defensive line on the defensive side of the ball, you want a three tech.
Mhm.
But that goes back to what we were saying about the trenches. So I'd like to see that. Um, Safety is another position I think, that's a sneaky need. Dane Belton hasn't developed into a starter. He's in the final year of his deal. And I wonder if they're going to add a tight end. I mean, it's a deep tight end class, and I think it makes sense to add a tight end, especially since Bellinger's in the final year of his deal. Manhurts is only signed for 1 year. I know they've got Greg Dulcich, so we have to see what he brings to the table. But you just wonder if you're going to add another tight end, and where that ranks in the list of things to do.
Yeah, it's while there aren't what you would call glaring holes, I think you can look across the roster and say it would make sense to add there. It would make sense to add there. It would make sense to add just about everywhere in some respect. But I'm with you in the sense that wide receiver, whether it's wide receiver, whether it's tight end, whether it's a running back that also has pass catching ability, they have added nothing to the offense except quarterback. So it makes sense to if if there's a playmaker who sits there for them at with one of their picks, if there's a playmaker, I think regardless of position, it might make sense to grab that guy.
Absolutely. You can never have too many playmakers. And I
And
realize, you want to feed Malik Neighbors. I get that, but you don't think teams are going to say, "Oh, maybe we should double or triple him up, take him out, and now let the Giants dare them to beat us with their other guys."
absolutely. By the way, Patty, I wanted to ask you. You talked a little bit about Wandale Robinson, and it's so hard to know what to make of Wandale. I mean, I love the kid. I think you and I both love talking to the kid. Um, Stand-up guy, nice kid, good player, tough as nails, catches a ton of balls. but I don't know that he's ever really been the playmaker that the Giants had hoped he would be. And I don't know if that's him. Is that the quarterback play? Is that the wide receiver room he's been in? I just I'm never sure what to make of Wandale because I always feel like there's more there, or that the Giants hoped there was more there.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to make of him either. I mean, I look at the amount of targets he got, and I thought it was kind of high. And I don't know again if that was because of the offense, what they had to do with the quarterback. I'm not sure what the reason why was, but I just feel like, when they drafted him, if you remember, a lot of people were like, "What's their plan for him?" It was a head scratching move at the time, and you know, I still think it's been clarified a little bit, but I still think you can argue that it's a head scratcher.
Yeah, just like you said, he catches a lot of balls, but
And I
he
think he had
doesn't.
the lowest yards. Was it the
Right.
lowest yards
Yard
per catch? I think it
or at
was.
least yards per target, something
Yeah,
like
something
that.
like
It's
that.
He
Which
just
again,
doesn't
I
do a
don't
lot with the balls
understand.
he catches,
Yeah,
and that's
I
the
don't
problem.
understand. So
Yeah, it's so, maybe they draft over him at some point, but
maybe.
we shall see. Patty, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a few long days, but it'll all be over soon, except for all of the moaning and groaning and complaining and asking, why did the Giants take that quarterback? What'd they do that for?
Yeah.
That guy stinks. Why did they draft him?
I'm just
Fire the GM.
I'm just glad mock draft season's coming to an end because I'm mock draft out. So
I I I just did my coverage plan for the weekend, worked it all out, and sitting there is day 2 mock draft, on my list of stuff
oh,
to do. And I was like, "Do I really have to put this here?"
did you really have to put that
Uh,
down, Ed?
or,
We're doing
early
we're doing
2020.
we're doing
er
best available.
Yes,
I guess this
yes.
is sort of a mock draft,
Well,
but
no, we'll do that too, but, what just we'll see what happens, Patty. Maybe I'll just cross that one off the list because I know you don't wanna read
I
it. All right.
mock draft out, Ed. I don't want to see
Yeah,
another mock.
you and
I
me
have to
both.
do one more, and I just don't even want to do it, but I will. I mean, I'm going to
No,
be
I
on it.
I
That's it.
I I did my last one on Sunday, and I'm not doing another one. I don't
But
care.
don't
I'm not
expect me to do a way too early 2026 mock because I refuse to do that.
I'll let Todd McShay and the rest of those folks do that.
Ditto.
All right, Patty, thank you as always, and I will see you on Thursday.
I'll be there.
So we'll see you, and probably a whole lot of other people who are just thrilled to be hanging out on Thursday night in the
Hey, the good
Giants
news
media
is
room.
maybe we finish up early, especially if they don't trade back into the bottom of the first round. So it is conceivable we finish
It
up
is.
early, get home early, and
You
we get
never
to bed at
know.
an hour.
Never know. Could be interesting though. I mean, if there's some wheeling and dealing, that's what makes it fun, Patty.
Oh yeah, that's why you got to stay for the whole 9 yards there. So
Th-
hey,
All
look, I
right.
got nothing else to do on Thursday night. I know I'm working Thursday, Friday, and
Yep.
Saturday, so
Yep. We're committed. So
we're
anyway,
nuts,
it'll
is
be
what we
it'll be
are. But
good. And
we're
y-
nuts.
yep, folks, make sure you check out New York Giants on SI and Patty's work over at Locked On Giants as well. Thank you as always for watching. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.